deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. If you're just joining us here at Cities 92.9, the news and talk of Bloomington Normal, I have David Shestokas on the line. He is a constitutional attorney. He has been involved in many battles within not only the land of Lincoln, but abroad in Pennsylvania, Arizona, dealing with election integrity issues. David, you kind of stopped there as the consent of the governed. And I always have underlined, well, I have it underlined in my pocket constitution right here that's worn out a little bit, but that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. And I know that today you and I could spend a lot of time, and I know that we probably, because we only have an hour, get to some of the heart of the matter, which is that we're not too far gone. I don't believe that, but someone asked the question, can a corrupt government, a corrupt system, bring itself to justice? And you have many issues you've been fighting. I mean, you were speaking on behalf of this election integrity and what was going on, now that pretty much every state has implemented some type of vote by mail system. And I know that they'd love to get to ranked choice voting and a plethora of other things that make it so the systems are, they believe, are more accessible, but really what they lend themselves to is greater fraud.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, David. Ever since, actually, I would suggest that the place to date that might be 1993 and the adoption of the Motor Voter Act.
Yes.
And that's the one where they started to have people automatically become registered to vote when they would get a driver's license.
Yes.
This was the beginning of the end of the real security of elections, where the argument was accessibility, but the actual goal was to do and tear down security.
Yeah.
And so the goals, the stated goals, are not exactly the same as the goals that are intended to take place. You mentioned some things about abroad, and can you do something with a corrupt society? Yeah, and that was interesting that you should call Georgia and Florida and Arizona abroad. But beyond that,
they're freer states than Illinois, is the way I see it.
well, if you want to go really abroad, in the early 90s, I spent a good deal of time in Lithuania.
Okay.
Right after the fall of the Soviet Union. And when you ask the question, can a corrupt society fix itself? I would suggest pointing to the Soviet Union and the 70 years, and Lithuania in particular, that they fought 4 generations. It took them to get back to a free society after Russian occupation, German occupation, Russian occupation over all those years. And I was blessed to be among 100 lawyers from around the world to help them put together their new constitution and institute the rule of law. So they did kick out what was then one of the 2 world's great superpowers. The Soviet Union was kicked out of all these other countries, the Latvias, the Estonias. Some are still messy. Ukraine is still a mess, but that doesn't mean that it can't be done. It was done in several of those places. You made me think, you asked me about that earlier today. And the fact is there's a fellow that was by the name of James Otis, who we probably don't spend any time studying that we should, that in the 1760s fought legal battles against what they called the writs of assistance, where King George's guys could just go run around, search anybody's home, anybody's property for any reason that they felt like. And there was one famous case on the writs of assistance case that King George, or that James Otis was arguing. He had to put together a 5-hour argument based on the history of the rights of Englishmen. And Otis lost that case. The judge decided against Otis in that case in 1760. But you know who was in the audience who watched all the argument? It's a fellow by the name of John Adams. that actually is what inspired John Adams to become the man that John Adams became, who had an interesting story, but more importantly, was in fact the mover and shaker in 1775 and 1776 that brought the Second Continental Congress to declare independence. So, yeah, Otis started in the 1760s, and Adams brought it to fruition. But Adams was in the audience.